Welcome to Lecture 8 of BIB201, Bible Doctrines 1. Today we're going to finish up the section on principles of the literal hermeneutic, and then we're going to start a new section on terms related to bibliology. Continuing with those principles, if you remember from the previous lecture, the first principle for a proper literal hermeneutic is interpret a passage by utilizing its context. The second was interpret a passage by utilizing other scripture. And this third one that we're going to talk about today is interpret a passage by utilizing its grammatical considerations. Here's what that means. Letter A, consider a passage's grammatical construction. Why should we do this? Well, number one, the definition of grammatical construction is using the syntax of a passage to reveal its own meaning in a passage. This means if we want to figure out what a verse means, sometimes if we can just look into the grammatical construction of how it's put together, it actually will shed so much light onto what we're trying to figure out. An example of this can be seen in Ephesians 2, verse 8. Let's look at that verse real quick. In Ephesians 2, verse 8, it says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God." Now the interpretation of this passage has brought about much debate. Some have asserted that the word gift there refers back to the word faith. So the issue here with this view is that when viewed in light of its grammatical construction, it is determined that in the Greek, the words gift and faith, they agree in number, but they do not agree in case and gender. Gift is actually in the neuter gender, while faith is in the feminine gender. Therefore, because of that grammatical construction, interpreting the faith as the antecedent to gift violates the grammatical construction of the passage, since the two words do not agree in case and number. So I know what you're thinking. What the heck are you talking about? Well, look at the verse. "For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God." What is the gift of God? Well, a lot of people say, well, the gift of God is faith. God just gives it to you, and you just have it as soon as He gives it to you. Well, that sounds great, and it may be true, but grammatically in this passage, you cannot defend that because the gift, the it, and the faith do not agree in gender. So, the grammatical construction helps us figure out that that is not an accurate interpretation. The best interpretation of that, since it and gift are neuter, is that the gift of God is salvation. It's "for by grace are you saved through faith." It's the whole clause before it about salvation being the gift of God. Now let's look at letter B. Consider the word meanings of a passage. The word meanings. Why is that important? It's because words are the basic building blocks of a sentence. So the best way to be able to understand what certain things are going on in a passage is to define the words that are used. Now, the key is to define them not in the English, but in the actual language it was written in, either Hebrew or Greek. If you do that, then a lot of words you'll find out are a lot less complicated than they appear, and some things we find out we actually have been believing because of an English word that's not actually defined correctly from the Hebrew or the Greek. Now let's move on to the fourth principle. Interpret a passage by utilizing its historical background. What's the definition of historical background? It's using a text's historical setting to help determine its meaning. A great example of that can be found in 1 Thessalonians 5:26. Let's look at 1 Thessalonians 5:26 real quick. In 1 Thessalonians 5:26, it says, "Greet one another with a holy kiss." Now, you and I would read this and we would understand that historically this is a different way of greeting people than we do today. Now, in this passage, Paul's instructing his readers to greet each other with a holy kiss. So, should this be done by Christians today? Well, by using the historical background of the text, it's discovered that this was, and still is in some places, a custom of Paul's day that signified a greeting. While this is how they express this greeting in Paul's historical setting, this is not intended to be a command for today. Greeting each other hospitably is, but not necessarily with a kiss. Today, we would do it with a handshake or a wave because of COVID, or an elbow bump, or whatever. But that's how we greet each other. In other words, Paul's just saying, be friendly with each other. Now, the fifth and last principle of a literal hermeneutic is interpret a passage by utilizing its genre. The definition of genre is using a text or style of writing to help determine its meaning. A great example of that is seen in Proverbs 11, verse 14. Let's look at that verse. In Proverbs 11:14 it says, "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in the abundance of counselors there is safety." Upon first glance, this appears to be a warning of failure for advice evaders and a promise of help for advice seekers. But once this verse is examined in light of its literary genre, a better interpretation develops. Now, since the genre of writing in which Proverbs is found is wisdom literature, then one could conclude that this verse is more of a maxim than a mandate. While it is wise for individuals to seek the advice of others, this does not guarantee that the outcomes will be attractive or vice versa. The genre of the writing indicates that this maxim is more of a helpful advice than an obligatory command. So that brings us to the end of the principles of literal hermeneutic. Make sure you remember those 5 principles of context, other scripture, grammatical considerations, historical background, and genre. Now let's move on to a new section, the terms related to bibliology. Letter A, the first term we're going to look at is the term called revelation. Number 1, this term refers to the act of God by which he communicates truth not previously known to man. An example of this is in Genesis 1. No one was there when God created everything, so he must have revealed it to someone. In this case, it's Moses. This was probably first done orally to Adam and on, and then formally done in the writing of the Pentateuch. Let's look at letter A. In the Old Testament, this term means to become visible, to open the eyes, and to show oneself to someone. Letter B. In the New Testament, this term means to uncover, disclose, or lay open what has been covered up. So that's the definition of revelations. In the Old Testament, it means to make visible. In the New Testament, it means to uncover. Now let's look at number 2. There are 2 types of revelation. The first one, letter A, is called general revelation. And general revelation are the means by which God makes himself known through natural ways. So this is an indirect means by which God reveals himself through other things. In the book of Acts, Paul and Barnabas address a group of people in Lystra who knew there was a God, but did not know his name. They had the natural, general revelation revealed to him there was a God, but they did not have that next one we're going to talk about that exactly showed who he was. So Paul told them who that God was, and the Bible records that they believed. Now let's look at the 2 primary methods of general revelation. The first one is through nature. Through nature. In Psalm 19 and Romans 1, we find out that the universe and all creation declares the reality of God in a language that all understand. A nonverbal language, but a language nonetheless. Because of this universal revelation, all are without excuse. No one can say that they did not know that God existed or was, in fact, real. Then number 2, through our conscience. Since even the pagan nations have a law similar to that given by God to Moses, this shows that a law is written on our hearts. We call this our conscience. Thereby, this demonstrates God's existence. Well, that brings us to the end of Lecture 8 for BIB201 Bible Doctrines. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. I'm here for you if you need me.